I never thought we'd end up in therapy. For years, Sarah and I were the couple people envied, the ones with inside jokes at dinner parties, spontaneous weekend trips, and a shared Spotify playlist that somehow never needed updating. We had history, we had chemistry, and I thought we had security. But things changed. It started subtly, like most fractures do. She became more distracted, her phone glued to her hand during evenings. We used to spend curled up on the couch. Conversations became short and transactional. I asked if everything was okay, and she'd brush it off with a tired smile. Just work stuff, she said. You know how it is. I tried to be understanding. I knew her job at the advertising agency was demanding. Late nights and tight deadlines were part of the package. But something gnawed at me, a sense that there was more beneath the surface. Then came the suggestion for therapy. We're just disconnected, Sarah had said one night over dinner, pushing her salad around her plate. Maybe talking to someone could help. Disconnection wasn't how I'd have described it, but I wanted to save what we had. If therapy could bridge whatever gap had formed between us, I was all in. That's how we ended up in Dr. Meyer's office, a cozy but sterile room filled with leather chairs, abstract art, and the faint smell of lavender. Dr. Myers was a soft-spoken man in his 60s with kind eyes and a clipboard perpetually balanced on his knee. He greeted us warmly as we sat down on the couch. Me stiff and anxious, Sarah oddly relaxed. So, he began, folding his hands neatly, what brings you both here today? There was a pause. I glanced at Sarah, waiting for her to speak. After all, this had been her idea. I just feel like we've drifted, she said finally, her tone casual, like we were discussing a bad restaurant experience. We used to be so close, but now, I don't know. It's like we're living parallel lives. I nodded slowly, though her words stung. Yeah, things have felt off lately. I'm not really sure why. Dr. Myers jotted something down. And how long would you say this feeling has been going on? Sarah tilted her head thoughtfully. A few months, maybe. That timeline caught my attention. A few months? I opened my mouth to ask what exactly had shifted during that period, but Dr. Myers spoke first. And what do you both hope to achieve from these sessions? I want us to reconnect, I said quickly. Get back to where we were. Sarah smiled faintly, but there was something distant in her eyes. Yeah, that sounds nice. Her lack of enthusiasm should have been a red flag, but I ignored it. I wanted to believe she was just tired, that therapy would be the reset button we needed. The first couple of sessions were mild, focused on communication exercises and identifying stressors. Dr. Myers encouraged us to be honest but gentle with each other. I learned to listen without immediately jumping to solutions, while Sarah practiced articulating her needs without shutting down. It was awkward but productive, or so I thought. Then came session 4, the session that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. We were halfway through a discussion about trust and vulnerability when Dr. Myers asked a seemingly innocent question. Is there anything either of you feels the other doesn't know but should? The room went still. I shook my head. I think we've been pretty open. There was a pause, and then Sarah let out a small, nervous laugh. Well, actually, there is something. I frowned, my stomach tightening. What do you mean? She shifted uncomfortably, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I've been seeing someone else. The words hung in the air like a grenade waiting to detonate. My brain struggled to process what she just said. Seeing someone else? What? I croaked, my voice barely audible. I've been having an affair, she said calmly, as though admitting she'd forgotten to take out the trash. For a few months now. I stared at her, my heart pounding violently in my chest. You're joking. No. There was no shame in her expression, no guilt, just matter-of-fact honesty that made my skin crawl. Dr. Myers cleared his throat gently. Sarah, this is a significant revelation. Can you tell Michael what led to this decision? I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but my throat felt tight, my voice strangled by disbelief. Sarah sighed as though this conversation was an inconvenience. It wasn't planned, she said, but I met someone at work, and it just happened. I didn't mean for it to get serious, but it did. My hands clenched into fists. Are you saying this has been going on for months and you didn't think to tell me? She met my gaze evenly. I didn't see the point. I knew it would hurt you, and honestly, I don't regret it. I recoiled as though she'd slapped me. You don't regret it? I repeated, my voice rising. How can you say that? I'm just being honest, she said defensively. I didn't come here to be the villain, Michael. I'm trying to be truthful, like Dr. Myers said. My mind raced, torn between rage and devastation. How had we gone from being that couple everyone admired to this? Sitting in a therapist's office while my wife casually confessed to betraying me without a hint of remorse? Dr. Myers interjected gently. This is a lot to process, Michael. Perhaps we should pause for a moment. But there was no pausing this. The foundation of my marriage had just been obliterated, and I was left standing in the rubble, blindsided and broken. I sat there frozen, as though the weight of Sarah's words had turned me to stone. The room was silent except for the faint scratching of Dr. Myers' pen as he took notes, like this was just another routine session. But this wasn't routine. This was a nightmare. Michael, Dr. Myers prompted gently, how are you feeling right now? I blinked, my pulse thudding in my ears. How was I feeling? That was like asking someone how they felt after being hit by a truck. I don't know, I muttered, my voice hoarse. Numb, I guess. Sarah shifted beside me, crossing one leg over the other. She looked annoyingly composed, as if she'd just confessed to eating the last slice of cake, not months of infidelity. I turned to her, the disbelief bubbling into something sharper. Why now? I demanded. Why tell me in therapy, in front of a stranger, instead of coming to me directly? She shrugged, her nonchalance twisting the knife deeper. It felt like the right time. The right time? I repeated incredulously. Are you kidding me? I didn't want to blindside you, she said defensively. I laughed bitterly. Well, mission failed, Sarah. Congratulations. You blindsided me in the worst possible way. Dr. Myers cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the session. Michael, I understand this is a difficult revelation. It's important to acknowledge and express your emotions, but let's also try to explore the underlying factors. I shot him a look. Underlying factors? She cheated on me, and she's sitting here acting like it's no big deal. What else is there to explore? Sarah exhaled sharply as though she were the one being inconvenienced. See? This is what I mean. You always make everything black and white. People make mistakes, Michael. A mistake, I snapped. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something stupid in an argument. Sleeping with someone else for months? That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Over and over again. Dr. Myers raised a calming hand. Let's focus on communication rather than accusations. I clenched my fists, biting back the urge to say something I couldn't take back. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her tone frustratingly composed. Look, I didn't plan for this to happen. I wasn't out looking for an affair. But after a while, it felt inevitable. Inevitable? I echoed. What does that even mean? She hesitated before speaking. It's just, we've been drifting for a long time, Michael. You've been so focused on work and routines, and I felt invisible. I stared at her, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. So instead of talking to me about it, you decided sleeping with someone else was the solution? She didn't flinch. I tried talking to you. You just didn't listen. That's bullshit, I said through gritted teeth. You never gave me a chance. Dr. Myers interjected again, his voice steady. It sounds like there were unmet needs on both sides. Sarah, you mentioned feeling disconnected and unseen. Michael, you're expressing feelings of betrayal and confusion. These are valid emotions. I rubbed my temples, trying to process the surreal horror of the conversation. How did we get here? I thought back to the countless nights I'd stayed late at the office, thinking I was doing the right thing, providing for us, building a future. Had I missed signs along the way? Or had Sarah just decided that loyalty wasn't worth the effort? You said you don't regret it, I said suddenly, my voice low but charged. Why? How can you say that after everything we've been through? Her eyes met mine without a trace of guilt. Because it made me realize what I want and what I don't. A sharp pang shot through my chest. And I'm what you don't want? She hesitated. I'm not saying that, but I don't know if this marriage is what makes me happy anymore. The air felt thick, suffocating. My mind reeled, grappling with the harsh truth she had just laid bare. Dr. Myers leaned forward. Michael, it's clear this revelation has shaken you, but perhaps we should use this moment as an opportunity to gain clarity. What do you want moving forward? What did I want? I wanted my wife back, the woman who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and hold my hand during thunderstorms. I wanted this nightmare to be a misunderstanding, something we could fix. But that woman wasn't here. This version of Sarah, sitting calmly on the therapy couch, wasn't fighting for us. She wasn't begging for forgiveness or expressing remorse. She was detached, like someone already halfway out the door. And maybe she was. I don't know, I admitted quietly, the weight of defeat settling over me. I thought I did, but now I have no idea. Sarah's expression softened slightly, but not enough to give me hope. Dr. Myers nodded empathetically. That's a perfectly valid place to be, Michael. We don't need all the answers today. What matters is acknowledging where you are and taking steps forward, whatever those steps may be. I wanted to believe that was possible, but right now it felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing but uncertainty below. I left the session in a daze, Sarah's words echoing endlessly in my head. I don't regret it. The room had felt claustrophobic by the end, Doctor. Myers' calm voice doing nothing to ease the rising panic in my chest. I couldn't sit there any longer, listening to my wife casually dismantle the foundation of our marriage as if it were a jigsaw puzzle she'd grown bored of. So I walked out. Sarah didn't follow me. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few scattered cars gleaming under the fading afternoon light. I stood by mine, gripping the cool metal of the door handle, my knuckles turning white. My breathing was shallow, uneven, like I'd just run a marathon without moving an inch. I needed air. Dropping my hand from the door, I turned and walked aimlessly down the street, the cool breeze biting at my skin. People passed by, laughing, talking, living their lives oblivious to the implosion happening inside me. It was surreal. A couple strolled past holding hands, their smiles wide and carefree. I wanted to scream at them, "Don't take it for granted. One day it might just vanish." Instead, I kept walking. I found myself at a small coffee shop we used to go to when we first started dating. Back then, we'd spend hours talking about everything and nothing, our dreams, fears, and favorite bands. Sarah would always order a caramel latte with extra foam, her nose crinkling when the barista got it wrong. Now the place just felt like a hollow reminder of what we'd lost. I sat in a corner booth, staring blankly at a cup of black coffee I didn't remember ordering. My phone buzzed on the table, Sarah's name lighting up the screen. I ignored it. The text notification lingered for a moment before fading away, leaving me with silence. A million questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. Who was this other man? How long had she really been seeing him? Was it just physical, or did she love him too? And the worst question of all, why wasn't I enough? That thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd given everything to this marriage, my time, my effort, my love. Sure, I wasn't perfect. I worked late sometimes, and maybe I got too comfortable in our routines. But I never stopped trying to be a good husband. Apparently, that hadn't been enough. The coffee shop door jingled as a group of college students walked in, their laughter grating against my nerves. I pushed my cup aside, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue. I needed answers. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled to Sarah's number. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I hesitated. What was I even supposed to say? I didn't want to hear more excuses or justifications. I wanted honesty, the brutal, unfiltered truth. But deep down, I already knew what she'd say. It wasn't you, it was me. I didn't mean to hurt you. Empty words that wouldn't change a damn thing. By the time I got home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the driveway. Sarah's car was already parked in its usual spot. I sat in mine for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The house looked the same as it always did. Neatly trimmed lawn, porch light glowing warmly against the darkness. But it wasn't home anymore. Taking a deep breath, I got out and walked up the front steps. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open, the familiar scent of vanilla candles wafting through the air. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her. She looked up when I entered, her expression guarded. "You left," she said quietly. "What did you expect me to do?" I shot back. "Sit there and listen to you talk about your affair like it was a bad haircut?" She winced but didn't argue. "I'm sorry." I let out a harsh laugh. "No, you're not. You made that pretty clear." She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Why now, Sarah? Why drop this bomb in therapy instead of just telling me like a decent person?" "I thought it would be easier with Dr. Myers there," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't want it to turn into a screaming match." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "Mission accomplished. No screaming, just complete devastation." Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly. "Yeah? Well, you did," I snapped. "And the worst part is, you don't even care." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. Not anymore. "I care," she insisted. I'm trying to be honest with myself and with you." "Honest?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Honest would have been telling me before you started sleeping with someone else. Honest would have been giving me a chance to fix whatever was wrong instead of throwing our marriage away." She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. "I didn't know how to stop it," she whispered. I shook my head in disbelief. "You didn't want to stop it, Sarah. That's the difference." The weight of those words hung in the air, a grim acknowledgement of the truth neither of us could deny. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice, a deliberate, selfish choice that shattered everything we had built together. And there was no going back. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I stood near the doorway, feeling like an outsider in my own home. Sarah sat on the couch, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her wedding ring gleaming under the dim light. The same ring I had saved for months to buy, thinking it was a symbol of forever. Now it felt like a cruel joke. "I need to know," I said finally, my voice strained but steady. "Who is he?" She flinched as though I'd struck her. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters," I snapped. "I've spent the last 10 years thinking you were my partner, my best friend, and now I find out you've been—" "What? Sneaking around behind my back?" "I deserve to know who he is." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she let out a shaky breath. "His name is Ian," she admitted quietly. "He works at the agency." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Of course he does. Let me guess. He understands you." "In a way I don't, right? That's how these things always go, isn't it?" Her eyes flashed with irritation. "This isn't some cliché affair, Michael. It's not about him being better than you." "Then what is it about, Sarah?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you decided our marriage wasn't enough, and instead of talking to me, you just replaced me." Her expression softened, but there was still a stubborn edge to her voice. "I didn't replace you. It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me," I said through gritted teeth. "Make me understand how the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, could betray me like this and not even feel guilty about it." She looked away, her gaze fixed on some invisible point across the room. "I didn't plan for it to happen," she said softly, "but after a while I started to feel alive again, like I wasn't just going through the motions." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Alive again. "Wow," I said bitterly. "Glad to know our life together was so dead for you." "That's not what I meant." "Sure sounds like it." She rubbed her temples, frustration flickering across her face. "You don't get it, Michael. You were always so focused on work, on being the perfect provider. And yeah, I appreciated it, but I felt invisible. Like I was just there, existing in the background while you chased your career." My jaw tightened. "I was working for us, Sarah. Everything I did was for our future." "I know," she said quietly, "but somewhere along the way we stopped being a team, and I was lonely. I didn't go looking for this, but when it happened, I didn't stop it." I paced the room, trying to contain the storm of emotions raging inside me. So that's your excuse? I was busy, so you had no choice but to cheat? I'm not excusing it, she said firmly. I'm just telling you how I felt. Well, congratulations, I spat. You found a solution to your loneliness that completely destroyed me. Her face crumpled slightly, but she didn't cry. Not like I wanted her to. I wanted to see guilt, regret, something that showed she understood the gravity of what she'd done. But instead, there was only a quiet resignation, as if she'd already accepted the outcome of this conversation long before it began. What happens now? She asked hesitantly. I let out a hollow laugh. That's a hell of a question, isn't it? She shifted uncomfortably. Do you want me to leave? I stared at her, the woman I had built my life around, the woman who had just torn it apart. Part of me wanted to scream yes, to tell her to pack her bags and never come back. But another part, the part that still loved her, despite everything, couldn't bear the thought of letting go so easily. I don't know, I admitted, my voice raw. I honestly don't know what I want right now. Sarah nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that answer. I'm sorry, she said again, though the words felt hollow. Yeah, I muttered. Me too. The weight of everything hung between us, heavy and oppressive. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. Just the wreckage of a marriage that had once felt unbreakable. And now all I could do was stand in the ruins, trying to figure out if there was anything left worth saving. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with a stiff neck and a splitting headache. I hadn't meant to fall asleep there, but after the confrontation with Sarah, the idea of sharing a bed with her felt impossible. The house was eerily quiet. No clinking coffee mugs, no sound of Sarah humming softly as she made breakfast. Just silence. For a fleeting second, I wondered if she'd left during the night, but when I sat up, I saw her key still hanging on the hook by the door. Her car was in the driveway. She was still here. I rubbed my temples, trying to gather my thoughts. The weight of the previous night settled back over me like a heavy blanket. The anger, the disbelief, the heartbreak. It was all still there, raw and unyielding. Part of me wanted to storm upstairs and demand more answers. Another part just wanted to crawl back under the blanket and pretend none of it had happened. But neither option seemed productive. Instead, I forced myself off the couch, my body protesting every movement, and headed to the kitchen. I needed coffee, badly. As I stood by the counter, waiting for the machine to sputter to life, Sarah appeared in the doorway. She looked as rough as I felt, her hair tangled, dark circles under her eyes. Morning, she said quietly. I didn't respond right away, focusing instead on pouring myself a mug of coffee. The smell was comforting, even if nothing else was. You didn't come to bed, she noted after a long pause. I took a sip, the bitter liquid burning my throat. Didn't think I'd sleep much next to a liar. She winced but didn't argue. I get it, she said softly. I want to talk. I set the mug down with a little too much force. Talk? Haven't you done enough talking, Sarah? You made yourself pretty clear last night. I know, she said, stepping closer. But I don't want to leave things like this. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. What exactly do you want from me? Forgiveness? Understanding? Because I'm fresh out of both. I want to be honest, she said, completely honest. I laughed bitterly. Now you want honesty? Bit late for that, don't you think? Her shoulders sagged, but she held my gaze. You're right. I should have been honest from the beginning. But I'm trying now. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to lash out again. Part of me wanted to hear her out, to understand what had driven her to this point. The other part just wanted to walk away and never look back. But curiosity won out. Fine, I said tightly. Be honest. Tell me why you did it. Tell me why I wasn't enough for you. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring absent-mindedly. It wasn't about you not being enough, she said finally. It was about me, not knowing who I was anymore. What the hell does that mean? I demanded. I spent so many years being your wife, building a life that revolved around us, she explained. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. And when Ian came along, he made me feel like I was more than just someone's wife. The words cut deeper than I expected. So what? You needed validation, and he gave it to you? She hesitated. It wasn't just that. It was easy with him. No expectations, no history weighing us down. I didn't have to be perfect or strong or anything really. I could just exist. I shook my head in disbelief. And that was worth throwing away everything we built together? Tears welled in her eyes, but I refused to be moved by them. I'd seen her cry before, when we lost a pregnancy in our second year of marriage, when her father passed away unexpectedly. Those tears had been honest, raw, and heartbreaking. These tears, they felt different, guilt-ridden but not remorseful enough. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. But you did, I said bluntly. You hurt me more than I ever thought possible. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Do you love him? I asked suddenly, the question tumbling out before I could stop it. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely caught off guard. No, she said quickly. It was never about love. Then what the hell was it about? She wiped at her eyes. I don't know. Maybe it was about escaping the pressure, the routine, everything. I stared at her, searching for something, anything that made sense. But all I saw was a woman I barely recognized, someone who had made choices I couldn't comprehend. I don't know if I can get past this, I admitted, my voice cracking slightly. I understand, she said softly, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I looked away, my heart heavy with conflicting emotions. I wanted to believe we could fix this, that we could somehow rebuild what had been shattered, but right now it felt impossible. The house was unbearably quiet after our conversation, filled only with the ticking of the clock and the distant hum of traffic outside. Sarah had gone upstairs, giving me the space I hadn't even asked for, but desperately needed. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee I had no intention of drinking. Her words lingered in my mind like unwelcome guests, repeating over and over until I wasn't sure if I was angry, heartbroken, or just numb. She didn't love him. It wasn't about me. She wanted to try and fix this. But was that even possible? I thought back to the early days of our marriage. The laughter, the passion, the sense that we could conquer anything as long as we were together. Back then, Sarah had been my best friend, my partner in every sense of the word. And now? Now she was a stranger sitting across from me, asking for forgiveness without really knowing if she deserved it. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. My heart raced as I made my way to the front door, grabbing my keys off the hook. I needed to get out of there before I suffocated under the weight of everything left unsaid. The drive was a blur. I didn't have a destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to escape the walls closing in around me. The familiar streets of our neighborhood faded into highways lined with trees and flickering streetlights. Eventually, I found myself at the lake where Sarah and I used to go on lazy Sunday afternoons. It was quiet now, the water still and reflective under the pale light of the moon. I parked the car and sat there for a long time, staring out at the horizon. Memories flooded back. Sarah laughing as she splashed water at me, the way her hair gleamed in the sunlight, the sound of her voice saying, "I do." It all felt so distant, like a story belonging to someone else. I wanted to hold on to the good times, to believe that they were strong enough to outweigh the betrayal. But no matter how hard I tried, the image of Sarah with Ian kept creeping in, poisoning everything we had built together. My chest tightened with the realization that hit me like a freight train. I couldn't stay. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about trust, about respect, about the kind of love that didn't need excuses or justifications. And Sarah had shattered all of that the moment she chose someone else over us. Even if she wanted to fix things, even if she meant every word she said, I knew deep down that I would never look at her the same way again. And that wasn't fair, to her or to me. By the time I got back home, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The house was dark and still, the weight of the previous night hanging heavy in the air. I quietly opened the front door and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath my feet grounding me. Sarah was sitting on the stairs wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up when I entered, a glimmer of hope flickering in her gaze. "You came back," she said softly. I nodded, but there was no relief in my chest, only a dull ache that wouldn't go away. We need to talk, I said quietly. She swallowed hard, bracing herself. Okay. I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. I love you, Sarah. I always will. But I can't do this anymore. Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might argue, might beg me to reconsider. But instead she just nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand, she whispered. The raw honesty in her voice nearly broke me, but I forced myself to stay strong. I need to find myself again, I said, my voice cracking. And I think you do too. She wiped at her eyes, her shoulders trembling. I'm so sorry, Michael. I know, I said softly, but sometimes sorry isn't enough. The weight of those words hung between us, heavy and final. Later that morning, I packed a bag and left the house that had once been our home. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with questions I didn't have answers to. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. A sense that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild my life from the ashes of what had been destroyed. I didn't know where I was going or what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of something new, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it.